Now, while I've called this the basics of query building, I've I put a whole bunch of examples in here. I think with the query builder, it can be a little bit hard to kind of figure out where to get started. So I think with a whole bunch of examples, maybe this will help kind of spur some creativity in anyone that's watching, or at the very least help with determining how to build some of the queries, because this is really the heart of the workflow and the decision engines inside ActiveDEMAND. It's really used in all sorts of different places, in contact lists and segments, and it provides for those decision-making decisions inside workflows and all over the place, really. It can be a little bit tough to get into. It's a little bit of logic, maybe like high school level logic, or even college if you're getting really crazy with it. But there is a little bit of thinking that you need to do in order to get the result you want to with it. You can think about the query builder kind of like filtering, either it filters for or filters against things. For filtering for, you could think of it like a Venn diagram, where maybe we want to put a query in for all customers, and then we want to see all customers who visit, or everyone who visited in the last 30 days. That inclusive filter would just have those ones in between, and that's how we could use those queries to filter for who we wanted to filter for. Now, in terms of the logic that's used in here, this is pretty common between any platform really that needs to query for stuff. We can query for the field even existing. And a good example of that is like email. If an email address exists, if there's nothing filled in, it will come back false, and if there's something in there, it'll come back true. Equals is like it has to be that exact thing. Contains means it just has that thing in there somewhere. So if I wanted to find someone whose email address contains ActiveDEMAND.com, for example, it could have all the other like stuff in the front. I'm just looking for it to contain it. Is one of is really handy if you want to pick several different of one thing. So for example, if I want to query for someone who's filled in one of several different kinds of forms, I can check those off and put those in with that. The less than or greater than, this can be handy. I'm going to show you a couple of interesting, weird ways that you can use that are pretty powerful. This is also the same logic that we use for our date math, which I'll show you a little bit later as well. And then there's Regex. I'm going to just touch on it very briefly, but that's another very powerful way of using our query builder. First, let's look at just some basic ones, and just exists is a good one, or contains. These are just some basic queries you can do on email, and I'll show you an example of this. Our example for this, let's say we had like a lead processing workflow, and inside that lead processing workflow, we want to make we don't want test form fills to be treated like everything else. Well, an easy way to do this is to put in a check up there. So on the top left there, you see is jump demand employee. And I'm looking for any email address that contains jumpdemand.com. That's a good way of finding if this is using one of our test form fills. And if it's a test form fill, I don't want it to follow the normal path of progression. Instead, I'm just going to send a Slack message internally. Hey, testing the form, and that's about it. So this is a great way, and something that I would recommend for you to get testing inside some of your workflows or some of your more complicated campaigns and that kind of a thing. I just love using the Slack notifications for this kind of thing. The next thing to think about is that we can use logic, and we can use kind of these blocks and layers to act like brackets from our grade 6 algebra. Did we do grade 6? Is there algebra in grade 6? Geez, I should know this. But there's no PEMDAS required. We don't need to think about like multiplication or anything like that. We just use the brackets and the blocks to contain them. So if we're to look at a standard block like this, we would first have the group, that group 1. That's kind of like the first inside bracket, if you will. And we can have multiple inside that group. Next, we have blocks, so we can have several different blocks that are calculated, if you will. And then we finally have multiple blocks that are joined by ands or ors. So in this way, we can create really complicated queries. We're not going to show too many today. We're just going to show some really basic ones. And I'd argue that making like really, really complicated queries and embedding them in your workflows makes them hard to follow and makes them hard to troubleshoot. I like using simpler little queries and labeling the decision such that it's easy to see what it's doing. And when you combine like lots and lots and lots of different queries in one big block, it makes it hard to figure out what's going on. And God help the next person who has to take over for you, try to figure out what's going on inside that query. Date math inside ActiveDEMAND is just, it's good to think about as an after or before a reference in time. So we pick that reference in time, and then we pick some sort of like time range before or after that thing. So an example that I have here is I have a list that is leads sent to sales in the last 7 days. So I'm looking for a lead notification type of email to sales. And then I want to find any of those that were created after 7 days ago. So think about that reference, 7 days ago and then after. So really in the last 7 days, that's what that's calculating for. And this will show me all the leads that are sent to sales in the last 7 days. So this is just a quick little example of date math. If I wanted to find, I could do like between in here to give me like a pocket in time. But this kind of thing can be handy for troubleshooting. Incidentally, if you have clients that want to see leads that are, this is a great one. If you, for example, want to send out a weekly email of all the leads generated in the last 7 days, I would highly encourage you to do something like this. You can set up an automatic email, a scheduled email report that has all the leads. And this is a great way of getting that contact list and making it easy to handle and easy to troubleshoot too, because if you want to, you can just scroll down here and hit preview, and you can see whether the whether the query is working like you think it should be. Next, we're talking about querying a submitted form. This is something that ActiveDEMAND has a lot of power around, and it's something that most of our clients, this is how they're using automation. Someone submits a form and they do something. There's some sort of nurturing that happens afterwards. And this is also where I want to introduce the idea of workflow versus global versus campaign visibility. And really this depends on what you want the query to look at. Global just is at any point of time. Workflow is, did it happen while we were in this workflow? And then campaign is if it happened to an asset in the campaign. I'll show you some different examples of that just to give you an idea. So the first one, and this is a real campaign that I have running for ActiveDEMAND. This is checking if someone has registered for a course in the learn.activedemand.com. So that's that first thing is doing is the person was registered for the course. And then the next thing I want to do, okay, they registered for it. I'm going to wait a month. And then after a month, if they haven't completed the advanced course, I want to encourage them to complete the advanced course. In this case, the form being filled out is not a part of the campaign. So that's why I have that set to global. So I'm checking all the form fills that person is ever going to fill out. So I need to be pretty specific in my query. That's why my query is checking for a history of submitted form, and the submitted form name is LMS Course Complete, and the course complete is Advanced Marketing Automation. I might be able to get away with just the submitted form in that last one. Maybe I don't need that middle one, but that's how I have it set up. And this is an example of, again, a global query context. The next one I have here is one where I'm using the campaign, and I'll tell you why. So imagine you were that person that just finished the LMS course. You finished the advanced. That's what that first thing is doing. And then I send an email, and the email is, hey, congrats on finishing the course and then finishing advanced. We'd like to send you a certificate. Here's the form for that certificate. Now that form is part of this campaign. It's actually an asset under it. This campaign has a landing page and it's got a form. Those are all just part of this campaign. So I can cheat a little bit. I don't need to like make some big crazy query because I know it's part of the campaign. So that's why I can use the campaign query context here. And it's just an easier way to check for whether they have filled out the form on this campaign. This is also useful if you have campaigns that act against the same contact. The same person can go through the campaign multiple times, and you need to check if they filled out the form this time also a great way of doing it is using this this campaign query context. So that's what's happening here. It's checking out, did they fill out the form this time for this campaign? And it makes it easy for me to set that in there. And incidentally here, this decision with this weight here, if they did fill it out, they'll just fall off this thing. If they didn't fill out, then I'm doing some reminders here. So I assume that I've got some sort of other automation handling if they did fill it out. And then finally, let's look at this workflow. Workflow is kind of like campaign. It's looking at the thing that started the workflow. So in this case, this is a workflow that's checking for some actions happened to a contact. We already know the contact. We've already claimed them. They're already in the CRM. Now we're trying to decide whether ActiveDEMAND should push push those activities up to the CRM. In this instance, we'll have this workflow being gone through lots of times. Anytime a contact does something interesting, and now we just want to see, what did they do? Did they do this? Did they do that? Did they do this other thing? So that's what we're doing here is we're checking, is this appointment meeting notes? Is this a sales note? Is this an extend my trial? What is it what is the thing that just happened? That's why we're checking query context of workflow. So we're not checking, did they ever have a sales note? We're checking, is the reason why this workflow is running because of a sales note? And if it is, we post it to Pipedrive. So that's the idea with this one. So that's different examples of where we use those query context. A good rule of thumb, if the thing they did is not part of the campaign or not part of the workflow, global. If it's like a custom field, global. If it's a form that's part of the campaign, well, maybe that's a campaign. But usually, most often you'll be using global query context. Next, how do we know if it's working? Well, there's a couple different ways that I like to test for whether a query is working or not. The first one is to put checks into the workflow that sends Slack messages out. That's a cheap and cheerful way of doing that. Another way is just to use a contact list. So a static contact list will let you query for contacts that match whatever query you're trying to do. So that can be an easy way of testing things out. So if I was to, let me just get my other screen over here. I can go test, and I'm going to add a new, I already have a test in there. Okay, test 45. I bet you I don't have that one in there. And I can create these test contact lists, and I can go add contacts, and I can try my queries out here. And then quickly see results of those queries. So I could see, oh, maybe I want to say phone number contains 555, and I could see whichever contacts have the 555 in their phone number. So that's a quick way of checking query results against contacts. Next, tags versus custom fields. This isn't necessarily part of the query builder, but this is best practice, and you'll see why in just a minute. Tags are free form. You put anything you want to into a tag. Custom fields can be more rigid. They can be flexible too, but I would argue that they have the most benefit when they're a little bit more rigid, because it makes it easier to assume things and build automation that works every time. It doesn't do anything weird. So long story short, custom fields are awesome. Just use those. We use a lot of custom fields on our accounts, and they're easy for people to understand what's happening, and they're easy for people to use to diagnose what's going on. So an example of where I might want to use a tag. We'll Clearbit, we'll get information on contacts, and then we'll have a date associated with that. I like to put those into these tags. So here's our example with Clearbit. We got data for this contact in 2021. So I could have some query in the future that checks to see if it's been done recently, and then redoes the Clearbitting on that contact. In any case, this is it's timestamped. It tells me exactly what's going on. I don't really need to do a lot of automation based on that. I would use custom fields more often though. Next, let's just look at some other basic queries. Again, I added a ton of examples in here because I think that the query builder is a little bit intimidating because there's so many fields that you can query. So maybe just by seeing some examples of what you can do, this might help with solving some of your query building challenges. One of the ones that I like to use is, does the contact have some information? If you get contacts into your system in a lot of different ways, form fills, appointment, live chat, sometimes they don't include information that you might assume that they should include. Phone calls might come in, or maybe the contact got added by some API that you were testing or something like that. So I think one of the good decisions to put early on in a workflow is, do I have contact information for this person? Any kind of contact information. And you can check for, do we have an org phone number? Do we have a contact phone number? Do we have an email address? Do any of these things exist? And if those things don't exist, well, I don't know how you're going to automate the contacts with that prospect afterwards. Another example here, and this is on the forms, we can check for what form was submitted. You can either do an equals here, or you can do an is one of if you have like multiple forms, or you could just start with equals and then add more on later on. But this is again just showing an example of querying for a specific form fill. One thing, if you're tracking phone calls and you want to post that stuff to your CRM or do something else with it interesting afterwards, one of the things that I like to do is check for a call forensics transcript. This tells me that the call is complete. This works for recorded phone calls, and it lets me know that that I can continue on with my automation. Sometimes automation is too fast and it outruns some other thing that's supposed to be happening. In those instances, you can either set like a fixed wait time, always wait 2 hours and then do the thing, or you can put wait for complete, and that's what I have here. It's waiting 3 hours, or did the thing complete? If the thing completed, it moves on. If it's 3 hours completed, it moves on. So this is an example of where I can do both. Another example here, text messages and phone calls both have incoming and outgoing directions, like what's going on with the call. So for an incoming text message, for example, text message comes into one of our tracked phone numbers. I can choose to push that to Pipedrive, to my CRM. I could choose to forward the text message to the contact manager. I can either do this here or on the phone number. They're both available, and I can see whether it's incoming or outgoing. So I can choose to do different things based on that. I wanted to show an example of using the greater than here. We have this really big dynamic image stack at ActiveDEMAND here that we use to show relevant cityscapes on some of our pages. So if you're visiting from Texas, I want to show like the cityscape of the city nearest to you, and I don't want to just show Houston because there's like Dallas and there's San Antonio and there's a couple of other major cities in Texas, and I want to make sure I'm showing the relevant one. So here I'm kind of I don't know if this is ham-handed, if you would call it that, but I'm going the GeoIP. So what's the IP of the person who's seeing the image? If it's in Texas, and I'm just using Latin long, so longitude is greater than 96.5. It's close enough to Houston. I'll do Texas for that. So you can use that greater than or less than to kind of bracket your states. Another example is in Alberta, I am hitting the northern part with an Edmonton cityscape, and the southern part with a Calgary cityscape. And I'm just slicing the province in half and using the longitude just like this. I want to show one more example here of using those is one of. So here we're looking for, this is actually a query to decide whether to show an agency's logo. And it's again just using dynamic content on our website. Here we're looking for org classification. That's custom to us. You guys don't have that. Well, you could add it if you wanted to. It's just a custom field. And for us, We have a couple of different agency types, so we're checking what kind of agency type it is, and then we're checking if the organization logo file name exists. If that file name exists, I probably have a logo and I could probably show it. So it's an example of when to show images or not. And if there's no image, then I'll do some other dynamic image showing. Another example of where you might want to do this is if you're using ActiveDEMAND for hiring, because we can act as a basic HR or especially inbound resume and inbound application processing, and we're using it ourselves for that purpose. And I can see here that I'm checking for what position is the person applying for. Are they applying for a client success representative or applying for this? And I can direct them to the right person, the right hiring manager, or to the right intake exam, or whatever we're doing to process that application. And then the last slide I just want to leave you with here is just on Regex. Regexes are a little bit more complicated to use, but they're very powerful in the way they allow you to kind of join things together. And I think that a lot of our clients out there get a lot of benefit out of just using even this really basic one. You can use the pipes, which is, if you look on your keyboard, there's a is that a forward slash? There's a slash and a straight line up just above your enter key, and that pipe can be used as OR to kind of cram a bunch of different possibilities into one query. So rather than making a whole bunch of query blocks that say if it's at this company or that company or that company, I can just use one query that says regex equals company 1 pipe, company 2 pipe, company 3. And it will use anything that includes any of those, any of that text from any of those strings. So this would come true for company 1, it would come true for company 1 blue, it would come true for blue company 1, anything that includes any of those text strings in there, I guess. And it's handy for test emails. If you have a variety of different test emails that you want to exclude, this is a great way of adding those in, or any of that kind of thing. So I lied a little bit about the Query Builder basics because we got right into advanced here. But there are, again, I wanted to show a lot of different examples of the Query Builder in use so that you could see some of these examples, and it might help you out in picking the right way of building your queries.